I recently had a new family experience. Lily was in the other room. She was in the living room with Krista, and she asked Krista, "Hey, can I have 2 cookies for a bedtime snack?" We had some Oreo Thins. They're like half the size, so it's not like we're totally loading our kid up with sugar, just kind of loading our kid up with sugar before bed. And Krista thought a moment, and she said, "Sure. Go and have your dad get you some." So Lily comes into the kitchen where I was doing some dishes, and she says, "Hey, Baba, Mama said that I can have 3 cookies for a bedtime snack." And me, my daughter is 3, and up to this point, she seemed like a very honest and upstanding individual. I believed her, but I made a joke, and I said, "I'm going to get 4 cookies. 3 for you, and 1 for me." She's getting to the point where she can understand. She knows her numbers, and she's starting to figure out how math kind of works. So we do these little with her. And then she responds with, "Oh, well, I want 1 cookie," because she was making the argument that the 3 cookies are over here, the 1 cookie is over here, so I want the 1 cookie and the 3 cookies. And she expressed that in her own little 3-year-old way, and I'm like, you know what? That is a very sharp argument, and being a former debate coach, I appreciate good arguments, so I gave her another cookie. Not realizing that Krista had said 2, Lily expanded it to 3, and I suddenly just doubled the entire total. So Lily goes back out into the dining room with her 4 cookies, and Krista says, "Who said you could have 4 cookies?" And Lily says, "Baba gave me 4 cookies," which is technically true. Now, my parents got divorced at a very early age, so I never got the opportunity to play the "well, Mom said, well, Dad said" game. But, man, Lily's out at 3 and already pulling that off. If someone were to ask under whose authority did you get 4 cookies? If she understood the question, I guarantee you her response would be, "I said I had the authority to give myself 4 cookies." See, authority and says is at the core of the gospel today. When the scribes come through and say, "Under whose authority?" they're really asking, "Who do you think you are? Why do you think you can get away with something like this? This is unheard of. Who do you think you are?" Now, when it comes to ancient authority, this is a very loaded word, this is a very loaded question, and ancient authority came from 2 different sources. So where does modern authority come from? This is a huge, deep question, and it's part of the reason why there's so much conflict in society. Because we can't agree on the same set of rules. We can't agree on the same set of facts. And that all goes back to a question of authority. Who do you listen to? When you go to find out the news, what channel do you turn to? That's your authority. It's really funny when I hear mainstream media companies complaining about the mainstream media. I'm like, that's you. You are one of those things. Not to defend mainstream media, mind you, but it's just so funny that even they play that game of undermining authority and claiming authority, and it's a back and forth constantly. We say that, oh, science in our world is authoritative, but then we like to seek out and find science that supports what we believe. Authority in our world comes from different sources. At least if we recognize authority, we go back to these 2 different arguments. The first is systemic authority. That there is a system in place that empowers you to do certain things. Driving down the road going 1,000 miles an hour, and I see some flashy lights behind me and a siren going behind me, and a loudspeaker says, "Pull over." Well, the local city has empowered that police officer to have the authority to tell me what to do when I'm out of line. That's systemic authority. This is our government. This is our law enforcement. This is the judicial system. And like every good systemic authority, there is going to be checks and balances. If I'm like, "Oh, doctor, I was in a hurry because," officer, "I was in a hurry because my wife is giving birth," he has the authority to arrest me anyway and find out that I was lying. If I don't think that he had the right to do that, I can appeal that in the court system, and we can have a trial. Systemic authority should have balances to it. The other authority that comes in our modern culture is that of what we call it merit. I have earned authority. Why are you an authority on the Bible? Well, because I've spent 1 to 3 hours every day for the past 10 years studying the Bible so I can speak authoritatively on it. Even then, there's going to be systems that support that. I've also have taken 3 years of the course of study through the United Methodist Church. That's my authority. What's your authority to comment on this beautiful piece of music? Well, I've been practicing the guitar for 8 hours a day for the past 20 years, so therefore I'm an expert in music. Expert authority comes from devotion, from experience, from dedication. Ancient authority came from 2 places too, and there are meant to be checks and balances as well. So the 2 big authorities in this world of ancient Israel, the law and the prophets. This is where all authority came from in that world. The law obviously came from Moses. Well, came from God through Moses. By the way, God is the ultimate authority, and God expresses his authority through these 2 sources up until Jesus. So God sent the law through Moses, and Moses was there to help train the priesthood, so that way the priesthood could be caretakers of the law and help teach the law and help people live into the law. Later came the king's responsibility to support the priesthood so that way they could do their priestly duty. This was what they called the systemic authority. But as with all systems, eventually there comes some corruption. We see kings start to abuse the law, to exclude some, to enrich themselves. And when this happens, the second authority comes up. The second authority in the ancient Bible is the law and then the prophets. The prophets were the balance to the law. When the law was given in the wrong hands and abused, the prophets came to set things right. Now, the prophets were never a welcome group. Nobody liked the prophets. If you're in power and you like that power, you don't want somebody to go through and say, hey, stop doing that. Now, the prophets would go through and challenge through great and lofty rhetoric. They'd make brilliant arguments. They would cite the law itself to help gain their authority. And when that always failed, God would empower them to do miraculous things. Like Elijah. Elijah is considered to be the prophet. He was the first, he was the best, he was the greatest. Well, not really the first, but close enough. When the king had brought in the worship of other deities and there were priests of Baal there, they challenged Elijah to a duel. Who can light their burnt offering just through prayer? Elijah, cocky as ever, just going on, made a few jokes, and boom, everything went up. The priests of Baal would go through and dance and tear their robes and cut themselves, and nothing would happen. Elijah said another prayer, and boom, they went up. Big old explosion, John McCain style. Bam! John McClane style. My apologies. That's the power of the prophets. The prophets were never recognized as prophetic in their day, but once the time of judgment came, we'll look back and be like, oh, that prophet was right. Let's start doing what he said. So when the scribes come to Jesus and they say, under whose authority, they're basically going, hey, do you get to administer the law? Are you pretending like you're a priest here? Sorry, son of David, that's not the priesthood. Or do you think that you're a prophet? Are you some sort of divine Messiah here to overthrow our authority? Now, the priesthood authority at this time came from the temple and the law and all that stuff. But the other authority was the priesthood and the Sadducees were very close to Rome. If Jesus had said, I am a prophet, I am the Messiah, they could just shake their hands at the mess and turn them on over to the centurions, which they eventually do. But if he had said, oh, I am the law, I am the giver of the law, I am God himself, so therefore I get to do that, they could execute him for heresy. This was a trap. So Jesus reverses this trap and he says, I'll tell you if you tell me. John the Baptist. Was his baptism from earthly authority or was it a divine baptism? Baptism is a funny thing. In the United Methodist Church, we only have 2 sacraments. Some churches have 2, some have 3, some as many as 7, but we only have 2. And how we understand baptism is very unique to the United Methodist Church. We believe that the baptism is a welcoming invitation into God's family and an affirmation of Christian beliefs. That is what it means to us. And it's performed by a pastor who his authority comes from the bishop and the conference and the District Committee on Ordained Ministry, the Board of Ordained Ministry, the Global Board of Ordained Ministry, and eventually we come to the statement that when it comes to baptism, the pastor is a placeholder. And since we do it in the name of God, Father and Son, Holy Spirit, they're the ones that are doing it, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They're the ones that are baptizing. I'm just holding the kids sprinkling the water. It's very different from what John the Baptist was doing, and very different from what we profess in, say, the Nicene Creed. We recognize one baptism for the forgiveness of sin, asterisk, terms and conditions apply. So when Jesus asks the Pharisee, the scribes, the lawyers and such, the priests, was the baptism of John the Baptist, was that of heaven origin or earthly origin? Now, to be clear, the act of baptizing. Not, John himself getting dunked and popping back up. It's the act that he was doing, the new practice that John was doing. And that's a fun question when you dive into it. Because first of all, there's this argument that only priests could do something like a baptism. Baptist's father was a priest. We find that out in the beginning of Luke, that an angel came when his dad was chief priest. His dad wasn't just a priest, but chief priest, and struck him mute until the boy was born. So, through lineage, because priests in ancient Jewish tradition were, it was a family deal, he had the authority to perform such things. Now, then the question then became, do they deny that? Do they affirm that? Because if they say, oh yeah, it was just an earthly thing, then their followers will be upset. But if they say they have a sacramental view of the baptism of John the Baptist, then Jesus will say, well, then why didn't you believe him? But then again, that would just reaffirm John the Baptist's role as prophet. See, they did believe in him, and that's why they turned him over to be executed, because that's kind of what happens to prophets most of the time in the Hebrew Bible. So they come up with the answer of, I don't know. I don't know is a valid answer. When you are talking about faith, when you're proclaiming your own gospel, when you're proclaiming your own witness, it's important to know your limitations. There are things that we just don't know. What happens when we die? Well, because of Jesus, good things. Because of not Jesus, bad things. And anything above that's above my pay grade. We can go through and look at specific lines in context to say, ooh, it's really bad, or ooh, it's really good, but in the end, that's all we're saying. Why is there suffering in the world if God is so loving and gracious? Again, anything we say at that point is speculation, because in the end, it's above our pay grade. We don't know. That's not what the scribes are doing here. No, they're trying to dodge the question. We don't want to either give Jesus ammunition to make a better argument, and we don't want to upset the people who believe in us or believe in him, especially since the day before there was a riot. So they take the cop-out, and Jesus responds with the cop-out answer, well, then I'm not going to tell you. Of course, the real answer is Jesus has the authority of both. Jesus has said before this in the Gospel of Matthew, he has come to uphold both the law and the prophets. He speaks from the position of God himself, and he speaks of a position that is there to be the checks on that balance. He is both law and prophet made one. Now, it's actually really good. It's a good thing, of course it's a good thing because it's Jesus, that he took this moment to not push the issue. He de-escalates. Right? You don't know? Well, then I guess I'm not going to tell you. After that de-escalation, he uses that opportunity to teach a lesson. He's teaching this lesson to the scribes and the Pharisees who are arguing with him, but he also teaches it to anyone else who are listening. Because this is kind of an important lesson. I'm the baby of my family, which means favorite. I have an older sister, and since I'm the baby, and right now I have toddlers, when Jesus shares this parable, I was kind of shocked, because from my experience, no to a request is just a knee-jerk response. Hey, can you pick up your toes? What I said when I was a kid was no, and eventually I would. When I say that to my daughter, she says no, and usually means it because she's a very strong-willed child and smarter than me. I think we've established that she's smarter than me already. And of course, my son, he's got a new thing. He goes, no, no, no. He does 3 of them. I only give him 1. But this is a fascinating parable, and I think that we've all witnessed this. Jesus is asking, who is the real follower of God? Who is the real Christian in this context? Is it the person who stands up front and recites all of the creeds, who recites all of the doctrine, who recites all of the scripture? Or is it the person that goes out and does it? That's one of the great things about Methodism, is that everyone will agree that it's obviously the person who goes out and does it. We do the will of the Father. But that's kind of vague, isn't it? I'm going to go out and love my neighbor. Here I am loving. Loving, 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 loving. How do we live into that? Because there are so many reasons that people would say, yes, I'm going to do the work of God, but then they don't. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's really, really hard to bless those who curse you, to love those who hate you. Sometimes it's really hard to extend grace and support to those who we don't think deserve it. Sometimes it's really hard to be in community with people. Sometimes we just say yes, but then we don't because we don't know how. That's a pastor problem. I'm sorry. Please forgive me because that's on me because I'm supposed to be teaching you how to do that. We don't know where the opportunities are to live into God's will. We say, do you want to be a Christian? We say, yes. Now what? I think that's one of the biggest problems we have right now. Is that, well, right now meaning forever, is that we have this great discipleship process. We get baptized as a baby, we go to Sunday school, we go to confirmation, then we go to youth group, and then I guess we sit on a committee? There's a big push in the United Methodist Church to develop a discipleship pathway, as they call it. So that way you can say yes, and then you'll know how to do it. Then there's the problem of those who just want to look like a Christian. My favorite example is the person who has the little Jesus fish on their car but then drives like a jerk. Come on, man. If you're going to put that in your car, drive like Jesus would drive. Meaning, put your sandals on and walk, man. You just take away their license. But it's hard. There's a reason why in the Sermon on the Mount Jesus says, don't blow the trumpets. Don't tout your faith. Don't brag about your faith because you're going to have to live into it, and that's hard. Be meek. Be humble. The one who says no, but then does it anyway, it's not about what the mouth says. It's not about the promises you make. It's about how you live into it. It's about how you follow through. And we need help knowing how to follow through. We need help being motivated to follow through. But Jesus is quite clear here that the religious authority of his time were abusing the law, that they didn't even know the law anymore. So that's why John and Jesus came, so that way they could be the balance, they could be the prophets and the law to help show us what to do next. Now, in closing, are you acting on your baptismal vows? When you get baptized and you're confirmed, you are asked, will you support this church? By this church, I mean any church that you were confirmed or baptized in. This church, meaning Any church, even non-United Methodist church that you seek membership in, are you supporting this church with your presence, your prayers, and your offerings? Tithes, talents, different services use different language there. But are you giving to the communal faith the best of what you have? Because that's the best place to start. And right now, in the time of COVID, the best of what you have might be a prayer. And by golly, that's awesome. I would love to hear it. Shoot me an email saying, Pastor Nate, I am praying for the church. I pray the church has peace, direction, confidence. Hey, Pastor Nate, I'm praying for you because by golly, I always need it. Pastor Nate, I'm praying for this person in the church because of. You can do that, but it's about that follow through. And we do need your presence if you find it safe. Next week, we're going to move, at Corridor, we're going to move from the outside to the inside and wear our masks again. If you feel safe in that environment, man, we'd love to have you. If you don't feel safe in that environment, I ask that you be present through just communicating with me and the staff and other members any way you can. A letter, a phone call, drive by and honk and wave. That's the start. Remembering our baptismal vows, remembering our membership vows. That's how we can start being the son that acts, who follows through. Because if we're just saying yes to Christ but not acting on it, he doesn't care. But if we're acting on it, that's the first step.